Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by Wolverine to control his rage. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of breaking things. The first instrument was the forest itself. Ancient trees, which had stood silent sentinel for centuries, cracked and splintered, their mighty trunks groaning in protest before crashing to the earth. The air, thick with the smell of pine and damp soil, was now acrid with the sting of blue flames and the choking scent of vaporized rock. The second instrument was his own body. Izuku Midoriya could hear it, feel it, in a way that defied medical explanation. It wasn't just the sharp, sickening snap of the humerus in his left arm, a sound that had echoed in the sudden quiet of the clearing. It was the deeper, more intimate music of self-destruction, the grinding of bone fragments in his right arm, a percussive rhythm of agony. The tearing of ligaments in his shoulder, a high, searing string section of pain. His muscles, overcharged and screaming, were the roaring brass, threatening to rip themselves from their anchors entirely. Pain was a constant companion, a dull, thrumming bassline that underscored every waking moment, since he'd inherited one for all. But this was a crescendo. This was pain that consumed thought, that turned the world into a tunnel of wavering, black-edged light. And at the end of that tunnel stood the conductor of this brutal orchestra, the villain Muscular. He was a monument to grotesque power, a hulking mass of crimson muscle fibers that writhed and pulsed over his body like a nest of angry serpents. His prosthetic eye, a cold, dead marble, was fixed on Deku, while his real eye, wild and bloodshot, danced with a terrifying, ecstatic glee. "Is that it, kid?" Muscular's voice was a gravelly roar that seemed to shake the very ground. "I gotta admit, I'm a little disappointed. You broke yourself to pieces just to land one good hit. Pathetic." Deku was on his knees, his vision swimming. His left arm hung limp and useless, a grotesque parody of a limb. His right was a mangled ruin, the bone jutting through the skin in a way that made his stomach heave. He had used it for the 100% smash, a desperate gamble that had only managed to stun the villain. He had nothing left. The well was dry. "I have to get up," a voice in his head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like All Might's, commanded. "A hero always gets back up," he tried. He planted his bloodied, trembling hands on the rocky ground, trying to push himself to his feet. A fresh wave of agony, white-hot and absolute, shot through his arms and he collapsed with a choked gasp. Muscular laughed, a horrible, booming sound. "Look at you. A broken little hero, trying to save a brat who probably hates you. You know who the kid's parents were? The water hose duo. I killed them, crushed them flat. And you know what? It felt good." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the ground crunching under his boots. Every step was a drumbeat of doom. Deku's mind raced, a frantic, panic scramble for a solution, any solution. Think, what would All Might do? He'd smile. He'd find a way. His thoughts snagged on the small figure huddled behind a rock nearby. Koda. His face was a pale mask of terror, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He was frozen, a mouse before a python. And Deku had put him there. Deku had failed to protect him. "It's a shame, really," Muscular continued his monologue, savoring the moment. "They died for nothing. Just like you're about to. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to take my time, break every single bone you have left before I finally crush that little green head of yours." Despair was a cold, heavy thing. It settled in Deku's chest, extinguishing the flickering embers of his fighting spirit. He had given everything. He had broken his body, pushed past every limit he had, and it wasn't enough. He was going to die here. Koda was going to die here, right in front of him, and it would be his fault. His mother's tear-streaked face flashed in his mind, All Might's proud, hopeful smile. He had failed them all. "Goodbye, you wannabe." Muscular raised a massive, muscle-wrapped fist, preparing the final blow. Then, a tiny splash. A weak, pathetic jet of water, no stronger than a spray bottle, arced through the air and splattered harmlessly against Muscular's cheek. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Even the forest fire seemed to hold its breath. Muscular slowly, deliberately, turned his head. His single good eye narrowed, focusing on the source. Kota stood there, trembling from head to toe, his small hands outstretched, his quirk flickering with desperate, terrified energy. "Leave him alone!" Kota's voice was a reedy squeak, swallowed by the immense clearing, yet it rang with the defiant courage of a cornered animal. Muscular stared. Then, a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. It was a predator's smile, full of cruel amusement. "Well, what do we have here? The little water pistol wants to play." He took his attention completely off Deku, dismissing him as a non-threat. He turned his massive body fully toward Kota. "You got guts, kid." "I'll give you that," Muscular rumbled, his voice dropping into a low, menacing purr. "Takes guts to piss on a tiger. Tell you what, since you're so eager to join your parents, I'll send you to them. I'll even do it the same way." Quick and messy, he began to walk toward Kota, and in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya broke. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't a muscle. It was something far deeper, something ancient and primal. It was the dam that held back a lifetime of repressed emotion. The doctor's sterile diagnosis, quirkless, Bakugo's sneering face, explosions popping in his palms, useless Deku. The sight of his mother, apologizing through her tears, as if his own genetic failing were her fault. The years of being told he was less, that he was worthless, that he couldn't. All of the frustration, the humiliation, the silent, impotent anger he had swallowed down for 15 years. It was a feeling he'd never allowed himself to truly feel. He'd channeled it into admiration, into analysis, into a desperate, frantic need to be a hero. But the rage itself, the pure, undiluted fury at the unfairness of it all, had been locked away in the deepest part of his soul. Muscular's threat to a child, an innocent child who had just shown more bravery than Deku felt he had in his entire life, was the key. The world didn't just tunnel. It went silent. The roaring fire, the crackling electricity of his own quirk, the villain's monstrous voice, it all vanished, replaced by a low, rushing sound in his ears, like the tide coming in fast and hard. The pain in his arms didn't disappear. It was simply rendered irrelevant, a distant signal from a body he no longer felt connected to. A cold fire ignited in his belly. It wasn't the warm, hopeful glow of one for all he was used to. This was a frigid, consuming inferno. It burned away thought, reason, and fear, leaving only a single, crystalline purpose: eradicate the threat. Green lightning no longer crackled around him. Instead, a violent, emerald aura began to leak from his body, a miasmic shroud of raw, untamed power. It wasn't the heroic energy of All Might. It was a pestilent fog, clinging to the ground, making the very air feel heavy and charged with malice. The green veins of One for All that crisscrossed his body glowed with a menacing, radioactive intensity. His head snapped up, and the eyes that met Muscular's were not the wide, determined eyes of a hero in training. They were the eyes of a predator. His pupils had contracted to pinpricks, and his irises blazed with a terrifying, toxic green light. Muscular, who had been enjoying his slow, terrifying advance on Kota, felt it. A sudden, prickling chill on his skin. He stopped, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. He turned back toward the broken boy on the ground. "What the?" He never finished the thought. Deku moved. There was no wind-up, no named attack, no heroic declaration. One moment he was a broken heap on the ground, the next he was a blur of motion. He didn't rise to his feet like a person. He launched himself forward from his knees, his body low to the ground like a wolf, his one functional leg and the sheer force of his quirk propelling him across the 10-meter distance in less than a heartbeat. His right arm, the one with bone jutting from the skin, was a mangled club. His left was a useless, dangling appendage. It didn't matter. He slammed into Muscular's midsection not with a fist, but with his shoulder and head. The impact was a wet, concussive crack that echoed through the clearing. It wasn't a smash. It was a tackle, a feral, brutal collision meant to break and shatter. Muscular, all 300 kilograms of him, was lifted off his feet. The air rushed from his lungs in a surprised whoosh. The muscle fibers covering his torso, which had moments before seemed impenetrable, shredded and tore under the focused, pure kinetic force. he flew backward, crashing through a thicket of young trees with the sound of a runaway freight train. Deku landed where Muscular had stood, crouching on all threes like an animal. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that didn't seem possible from a human throat. He wasn't thinking, he wasn't feeling pain. The red haze had descended, painting the world in shades of threat and violence. All he saw was the target, the thing that had threatened the small, helpless one. And it was still moving. Muscular pushed himself out of the splintered wreckage, his face a mask of disbelief and sudden, dawning rage. "You little piece of..." Deku was on him again. He bounded off a large rock, his movements impossibly fast, his ruined body propelled by the raw, unadulterated power that now shrouded him. Muscular swung a massive arm, intending to swat him out of the air like a fly. Deku didn't dodge. He moved through it. He drove his mangled right arm, broken bone and all, directly into the path of the swing. The impact was horrific. There was a wet crunch as his already shattered radius and ulna were ground into splinters, but the force of One for All, untethered from any form of control, turned his arm into a battering ram. He punched through Muscular's augmented bicep. Crimson fibers, blood, and gore exploded outward. Muscular howled, a shriek of genuine pain and shock this time. His arm went limp, the muscle defense system completely overwhelmed by the sheer, focused brutality. But Deku wasn't done. The growl in his throat escalated into a full-throated, inarticulate roar. Using his momentum, he swung his body around, his good leg lashing out in a vicious kick that connected with Muscular's knee. The sound was like a gunshot. The villain's leg buckled at an unnatural angle, and he crashed to the ground, bellowing in agony. From Kota's perspective, huddled behind the rock, this was a new kind of terror. The person who had saved him was gone. In his place was a monster wreathed in green fire, moving with a horrifying, inhuman grace. This wasn't a hero's fight. It was a slaughter. He could see Deku's face, twisted into a mask of blank, predatory fury, his glowing green eyes fixed on his prey. Muscular was down, his leg broken, one arm mangled. He tried to crawl back, his bravado and glee replaced by a primal fear. The hunter had become the hunted. He looked up at the approaching figure, at the glowing eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt true terror. "Wait! Stop! I give!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic. The roaring creature that was once Izuku Midoriya did not hear him. Or if it did, it didn't care. Deku straddled the fallen villain's chest, his knees pinning Muscular's shoulders to the ground. He raised his right fist, the pulped, bloody, bone-protruding mess that was barely recognizable as a hand, and he brought it down. Crunch! The first blow landed on Muscular's jaw, snapping his head to the side with enough force to crack the rock beneath it. He raised it again. Crunch! The second shattered his cheekbone, the prosthetic eye popping from its socket to roll uselessly into the dirt. Again. Thwack. And again. Squelch. He wasn't using smashes. He wasn't calling out names. He was just hitting. Each blow was fueled by a spike of that cold, raging power, a relentless, percussive battery that was both brutally efficient and terrifyingly personal. He was beating Muscular into the very earth, his roars mixing with the sickening, wet sounds of the impacts. The villain was unconscious, a broken puppet twitching under the assault, but Deku didn't stop. He couldn't. The red haze showed him only one thing, a threat that was not yet neutralized. A target that was not yet pulp. "Midoriya!" A voice, sharp and clear, cut through the rushing in his ears. It was different from the sounds of the fight. It was inside his head. He ignored it. He raised his fist again. "Midoriya, stop!" The voice was louder now, more urgent. It was Mandalay, her telepath quirk slicing through the fog of his rage like a beacon. He faltered. His fist hovered in the air, trembling with contained power. The red haze wavered, like static on a screen. Another sound broke through. A small, high-pitched scream of pure terror. "Stop! Please, you're scaring me! Stop!" It was Kota. That tiny, terrified voice was the anchor. It was the one pure thing in a world of blood and rage. The name Deku meant useless, but it had also come to mean you can do it. It was the name of a hero, and that voice was screaming at a hero, begging him to stop being a monster. The red haze shattered. It was like waking from a nightmare. The sounds of the world rushed back in all at once, the crackling of the fire, the distant shouts, the wind whispering through the broken trees. And the pain. Oh God, the pain. It hit him like a physical blow, a tidal wave of pure agony from every nerve ending in his upper body. His arms felt like they had been put through an industrial meat grinder. His back, his shoulder, his head, everything screamed. He gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air, and the roar died in his throat, replaced by a choked sob. His vision cleared. The toxic green light faded from his eyes. He looked down. He was straddling Muscular, whose face was a bloody, unrecognizable ruin. The villain was utterly still, buried a few inches into the crater Deku's fists had made. His own hands, he couldn't call them hands anymore. They were pulp. Shredded flesh, gore, and bone shards, all caked in Muscular's blood and his own. He didn't remember this. He remembered Muscular threatening Kota. He remembered a cold, angry feeling. And then, just flashes. A roar that felt like it came from his own chest. The feeling of impact, and then this. Waking up covered in blood, perched on the chest of a man he had very nearly beaten to death. A wave of nausea and self-revulsion washed over him. He scrambled backward, crab walking away from the body as if it were radioactive, his mangled arms dragging uselessly behind him. He stared at his own hands, his blood-soaked, ruined hands, with a horror that eclipsed any pain he was feeling. What did I do? The thought was a scream in his mind. What did I do? He looked over at Kota, who was pressed against the rock, his eyes wide with a terror directed not at the villain, but at him. At Deku. That look broke him more than any bone ever could. The strength, the rage, the inhuman power, it all vanished, leaving behind a broken, terrified 15-year-old boy. The world tilted on its axis, the stars wheeling in the sky. His breath hitched, his body finally succumbing to the catastrophic damage. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Mandalay running toward him, her face a mask of shock and concern. Then nothing. When a sliver of consciousness returned, it was to a familiar, booming voice. Absolutely catastrophic damage, recovery girl. Worse than the sports festival. Worse than Stain. It's not just the damage, Tashinori, a weary, aged voice replied. Look at the pattern of the injuries. It's savage. Deku's eyelids fluttered. He was lying on something soft. A stretcher. The world was a blur of motion. He could feel the jostle of being carried. He could smell antiseptic and smoke. He managed to crack his eyes open. He saw the skeletal, worried face of All Might, in his weakened form, looking down at him. Beside him, Shota Aizawa, his face grim, his capture weapon wrapped tightly around his neck. All Might. Deku's voice was a dry rasp. All Might's face flooded with relief. Young Midoriya. He's awake. But the relief was quickly tempered by a deep, troubled look in his hollowed eyes. He had arrived just moments after Mandalay had managed to subdue Deku. The scene had frozen him to his core. He had seen the aftermath of his own battles. They were destructive, certainly, but they were the result of overwhelming power used to end a threat. This was different. The area around Muscular wasn't just destroyed, it was desecrated. The villain himself looked less like he had been defeated and more like he had been mauled by a wild animal. The sheer brutality, the overkill, it was something All Might had only ever seen in the most unhinged, bloodthirsty villains. And to see it wrought by his gentle, self-sacrificing, crybaby successor, it was profoundly disturbing. He had looked at the terrified expression on young Kota's face, the professional shock on Mandalay's, and the broken, unconscious form of his student, and he had understood. One for All wasn't just a quirk that stockpiled power. It was an amplifier. It took everything the user was, their hopes, their dreams, their courage, and magnified it. But what if it also magnified the things they kept hidden? The dark, ugly things? What happened? Deku whispered, his voice trembling. Muscular, is Kota. The boy is safe, Midoriya, Aizawa said, his tone flat and unreadable, which was somehow more unnerving than anger. The villain is neutralized. He'll be in intensive care for months, if he survives. The way Aizawa said neutralized sent a fresh spike of cold dread through Deku. He tried to sit up, but a fresh explosion of agony from his arms and a firm hand from All Might pushed him back down. Easy, my boy. Just rest, All Might said, his voice softer now, but the worry was still etched onto his face. Deku's mind was a fog, but fragments of the memory were beginning to surface like debris in a murky pond. The growling sound. The feeling of his fist connecting with flesh and bone, over and over. The red, so much red. He looked at his arms. They were wrapped in thick, hastily applied bandages, already soaked through with blood. They didn't feel like his own. They felt like weapons he couldn't control. I don't remember, he confessed, shame and fear making his voice crack. I remember being angry, and then, it's all hazy. I woke up. All Might and Aizawa exchanged a look over his head. It was a look heavy with unspoken concerns, a look that confirmed Deku's deepest, darkest fear. He hadn't been a hero. In those final moments of the fight, when he had given in to that cold, dark fire, he had been a monster. And the worst part? A part of him, a deep, primal part he didn't want to acknowledge, knew that the monster had won. It had done what the hero couldn't. Tears began to well in his eyes, hot and shameful. They weren't tears of pain or relief. They were tears of terror. Terror of the villain he had just defeated, and a far greater terror of the stranger he had just discovered living inside his own skin. The stranger who wore his face, used his power, and was wreathed in a terrifying, red haze. The sterile white of the infirmary ceiling was the first thing Izuku Midoriya saw. It was a sight that had become achingly familiar over the past few months, a canvas onto which his mind projected memories of failure and pain. But this time, it was different. He wasn't just seeing the ghost of a past fight, he was haunted by the ghost of himself. A groan escaped his lips, a sound scraped raw from a throat that felt like it had been used to gargle gravel. He tried to move, but his arms were encased in something heavy and unyielding, not casts, but complex medical braces that hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy. He could feel the familiar, gentle warmth of Recovery Girl's quirk, but it was like trying to fill an ocean with a teacup. The pain was a distant, roaring sea, and her power was just a small dock holding firm against the tide. He turned his head, the motion stiff and slow. Recovery Girl, Chio Shizenji, was sitting in a chair by his bed, her brow furrowed as she reviewed a datapad. She looked more tired than he had ever seen her. "Ah, you're awake," she said, her voice gentle but laced with a professional exhaustion. "Don't try to move, dearie. The damage this time, it was extensive. My arms." Izuku whispered. "We'll get to that," she said, setting the pad aside. "First, I need you to drink this." She held a small cup with a straw to his lips. It was a nutrient-rich, vaguely sweet liquid that he gulped down greedily. Only then did he realize how parched he was. As the fog in his mind cleared, the nightmare came rushing back. It wasn't about muscular. It was worse. He was the monster. He saw the world through those glowing green eyes, a world painted in the stark, simple colors of predator and prey. He felt the sickening, wet crunch of his fist hitting the villain's face, again and again. He felt a horrifying satisfaction with each blow, a cold, clean joy in the act of destruction. The dream always ended the same way, with Kota's small, terrified face, screaming not at a villain, but at him. He woke up from it with his own silent scream, his heart hammering against his ribs, drenched in a cold sweat. It had been happening every time he drifted off for more than a few minutes. "The scarring will be permanent," Izuku, Recovery Girl said, her voice pulling him from the dregs of the nightmare. He flinched at her use of his first name. She rarely did that. "As scarring? The way you used your quirk, it wasn't just clean breaks this time. You shredded the muscle and shattered the bones simultaneously, repeatedly. My quirk can accelerate your body's natural healing, but it can't erase the memory of trauma from the tissue itself. When a wound is that violent, the body panics. It builds a fortress, not a house." She gestured to his arms. "There will be significant keloid scarring along the length of both forearms. Jagged. A permanent reminder, a permanent brand. A mark of the monster." Izuku stared at the advanced braces encasing his limbs. He didn't need to see the skin beneath to know she was right. He could feel it. A deep, angry tightness that was different from all the other breaks. This felt final. He said nothing. He just stared at the ceiling, his mind a silent, swirling vortex of shame. He replayed the moment in the forest. The cold fire. The loss of control. The horrifying efficiency of his own violence. He had won. He had saved Kota. But he hadn't been a hero. A hero doesn't inspire that kind of terror in the person they're saving. A hero doesn't lose themselves to a blind, bloodthirsty rage. The door to the infirmary hissed open. Tashinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, stepped inside. His face was a roadmap of worry, the deep lines around his eyes and mouth more pronounced than usual. He held a small, plastic bag, likely containing some of the boys' favorite katsudon from the cafeteria, a peace offering. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice soft. How are you feeling? Izuku didn't answer. He couldn't. What could he say? I'm fine, except for the part of me that's terrified I'm going to become a villainous beast. He just turned his head away, staring at the blank white wall. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken fears. All Might had been trying for 2 days. 2 days of Izuku being awake, yet utterly absent. He wouldn't talk about the fight. He wouldn't meet his mentor's eyes. He would eat what he was given, follow Recovery Girl's instructions with listless obedience, and then retreat back into the fortress of his own mind. The other students are safe. All Might tried again, setting the bag on the bedside table. Young Bakugo was recovered. The villains were thwarted. You did it, my boy. You saved that young man's life. The words, meant to be a comfort, were like salt in a wound. I saved him, Izuku thought, a bitter, self-deprecating voice echoing in his head. But did he want to be saved by that? He finally looked at his mentor, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears of a different kind. Not pain, but pure, undiluted fear. I almost killed him, All Might, he whispered, his voice cracking. Muscular. He was unconscious. He was beaten. And I kept hitting him. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. He finally looked down at his braced arms, a wave of revulsion making his stomach churn. These aren't my hands anymore. They belong to whatever that was. All Might's heart clenched. He had no answer for that. He had seen the raw footage. He knew the boy was right. It was the heat of battle, All Might offered weakly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. One for all is a powerful, emotional quirk. You were pushed to your absolute limit. No, Izuku interrupted, his voice gaining a raw, desperate edge. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a bigger smash. It wasn't more power. It was different. It was cold. And I liked it. God help me, All Might, in that moment, some part of me liked it. The confession hung in the air, horrifying and absolute. The great symbol of peace, the man who had faced down armies of villains, who had defeated all for one, had no comforting smile, no heroic platitude to offer his successor. He could only stand there, a gaunt, powerless man, as his chosen heir confessed the darkness that One for All had unearthed, a darkness All Might had never known was there. He left the infirmary a few minutes later, the uneaten katsudon sitting on the table like a monument to his failure. He walked the sterile, quiet halls of UA, his mind a tempest. He had taught the boy to be a hero, to channel power, to save people. He had never considered he might have to teach him how to not be a monster. And the terrifying truth was, he had no idea how. His path led him to one inevitable destination, the office of the principal. Principal Nizu's office was an oasis of calm and intellect at the heart of the storm-ravaged school. High-definition monitors lined one wall, displaying security feeds, news reports, and complex data streams. The opposite wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the UA campus, a symbol of the future he was sworn to protect. Nizu, the chimera with the high-spec brain, sat behind his large oak desk, a cup of expensive tea steaming between his paws. He wasn't looking at any of the monitors. He was looking at the two people who had come to him for answers, a weary, haggard recovery girl and a deeply troubled Tashinori Yagi. The physical prognosis is, for lack of a better word, alarming, Chio began, pulling up a medical chart on one of the main screens. It was a complex 3D model of Midoriya's arms, angry red lines indicating catastrophic tissue damage. The output of One for All during the final moments of the engagement was astronomical. We've never registered anything like it from him. It wasn't a controlled burst, like his smashes. It was a sustained, chaotic flood of energy. She pointed to a graph showing power output over time. For most of the fight, it was a series of sharp, high peaks, the 100% smashes, followed by immediate drops to zero. But at the end, the graph changed. It shot up to a level far exceeding the previous peaks and then stayed there, a jagged, violent plateau. His body was essentially redlining, but instead of the engine blowing, it began to devour itself, she explained. The energy wasn't just breaking his bones, it was causing spontaneous myofibrillar tearing on a cellular level. It was liquefying his muscle tissue even as he used it. If Mandalay and the Kota boy hadn't broken through his state, if he had continued for even another 30 seconds, his arms would have been unrecoverable. Not even my quirk could have compelled his cells to regenerate from that level of systemic trauma. We would have been looking at amputation. Best case scenario. Toshinori flinched, a pained expression crossing his face. And the worst case scenario? Niza asked calmly, taking a slow sip of his tea. Systemic shock leading to cardiac arrest, Chiyo said bluntly. He quite literally almost beat himself to death while beating the villain. Niza's whiskers twitched. He turned his attention to another screen, which was playing a silent, grainy video file. It was security footage from a long-range camera that had been monitoring the training area. It showed the clearing, the fire, and the final, brutal confrontation. They watched as the green, feral aura enveloped Midoriya. They watched his inhuman speed, the way he moved not like a fighter but like a predator. They watched the brutal, efficient way he disabled Muscular, and then they watched the end. The relentless, horrifying pummeling of an already defeated foe. Even without sound, the pure, unadulterated violence of the act was sickening. Niza paused the video on a close-up of Midoriya's face, just before he was snapped out of his trance. The eyes were what held them. Glowing, empty of everything but a cold, murderous rage. It is the eyes that are most concerning, Niza said, his voice soft. That is not the look of a hero pushed to his limit. That is the look of a berserker, a state in which friend and foe cease to have meaning, and only the act of destruction remains. Toshinori finally broke his silence, his voice heavy with guilt. It's my fault. One for All is more than just stockpiled power. It's a confluence of wills, of spirits. It amplifies the user's core, his courage, his desire to save, it turns them into heroic feats. But I never considered what else it might amplify. He sank into a chair, looking older and more fragile than ever. The boy has spent his entire life being told he was less than nothing. Powerless. Useless. There must be a reservoir of anger in him, a deep, hidden well of it that he's kept buried his whole life. I gave him this incredible power, and it seems to have tapped directly into that well. I can teach him how to throw a punch. I can teach him the ethics of heroism. But this primal fury, I don't know how to teach him to control it. I am afraid, Niza, I am afraid that I have given a sacred torch to a boy standing in a room full of gunpowder. The confession was stark and absolute. The symbol of peace, the greatest hero the world had ever known, was admitting his own profound weakness as a mentor. He was lost. The office was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint hum of the monitors. Niza set his teacup down with a soft click. He swiveled in his chair and typed a command into his keyboard. One of the central monitors flickered, the video footage replaced by a heavily encrypted login screen. Niza's paws flew across the keys, inputting a code that was likely longer than most novels. The screen flashed, and a single file appeared. It looked ancient, even for a digital file. The formatting was archaic, from a time before the current Hero Network infrastructure. It was a simple, stark white folder icon with a single word beneath it, typed in a blocky, no-nonsense font. Logan. In the pre-modern era, Niza began, his beady black eyes fixed on the file, before the rise of the symbol of peace standardized heroics, and brought about an age of unprecedented public trust. Things were messier. He opened the file. It was sparse, heavily redacted. Black bars covered most of the text. There was no photo, only a rough sketch of a man with wild hair, mutton-chopped sideburns, and a permanent scowl. There were individuals whose quirks were too violent, too destructive, or too difficult to control for mainstream heroics. They weren't villains, not in the traditional sense. They were more like forces of nature, assets to be pointed at a problem that couldn't be solved with a smile and a flashy costume. They operated in the shadows, on the fringes. Their records were kept separate, under deep classification. He tapped a key, and a line of text became visible. Subject, Logan, surname unknown, classification, S-class threat/asset, quirk, speculative adamantine rage. Innate healing factor of unknown limits. Hyperacute senses. Retractable bone claws. All abilities appear to be exponentially amplified by a combat-induced berserker state. Toshinori stared at the screen, a flicker of distant, uneasy recognition in his eyes. This individual, Logan, was infamous in certain circles, Nisa continued. He was considered unkillable, uncontrollable. A lone wolf. His defining characteristic was not his healing or his claws, but his rage. A boundless, feral fury that he could unleash in battle. Most who fall into such a state are consumed by it. But Logan, over decades of life, he somehow learned not to suppress it, but to hone it. To aim it, to ride the storm without being destroyed by it. He disappeared from all official records over 30 years ago, Recovery Girl murmured, reading the final line of the visible text. Status, inactive/presumed self-exiled. Indeed, said Nizu. He vanished around the time your star began to rise, Toshinori. The world had a new kind of hero. It didn't need its messy, brutal ghosts anymore. He simply walked away. Nizu swiveled his chair to face All Might directly. You are correct, Toshinori. You cannot teach young Midoriya how to control this part of himself. A sheep cannot teach a wolf how to hunt, but another wolf can. The implication hung in the air, audacious and terrifying. Toshinori's mind flashed back, over 35 years ago. He was a younger All Might, still growing into his power, not yet the symbol but already a rising star. He'd been in the aftermath of a brutal fight with a particularly nasty Yakuza offshoot in the Northern Territories of Canada, a joint operation. The villains were dealt with, but the area was a war zone, and in the middle of it, sitting on a log and cleaning blood from a set of long, bony claws protruding from his knuckles, was a man. He was short, stocky, and radiating an aura of such profound violence that it made the hair on a young All Might's neck stand up. He remembered the conversation. It had been brief, gruff. All Might had tried his usual booming, friendly introduction. The man had just grunted, not even looking at him. You make a lot of noise, pretty boy, the man had said, his voice a low growl. I am All Might. I am here to help. The man had finally looked up. His eyes were ancient, weary, and held a deep, simmering anger that had nothing to do with the recent fight. Help? You help by making people feel safe. I help by making sure the monsters stay down. He'd retracted the claws with a fleshy, sickening snick and stood up. This world's changin'. It's gonna want your kind of help, not mine. Fine by me. Less paperwork. He had walked off into the snow-dusted forest and disappeared. All Might had never forgotten the feeling he got from him, the scent of old blood, steel, and an untamable, animalistic spirit that had somehow, impossibly been leashed. I've met him, Toshinori said, his voice barely a whisper. Once. A long, long time ago. He was formidable. He is the only one, Nisa said with quiet finality. The only person on this planet who might understand the specific nature of the abyss young Midoriya is staring into. The only one who can teach him to look into that abyss and make it blink first. A new resolve began to form in Toshinori's hollow eyes, replacing the despair. It was a desperate, wild plan. It meant pulling his successor out of UA, taking him off the grid, and entrusting him to a man who was officially classified as a threat himself. It was reckless. It was unorthodox. It was probably insane, but as he thought of Izuku's terrified, pleading eyes, and the image of that monstrous, red haze, he knew it was the only option they had. The path to becoming the next symbol of peace had taken a sudden, dark detour. And it led into the wilderness, in search of a ghost from a bygone era. Find him, Mizu, Toshinori said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old command. Find me the Wolverine. The air that greeted Izuku Midoriya as he stepped off the small, propeller-driven plane was so cold it felt like a physical slap to the face. It was a clean, sharp cold, laced with the scent of pine and the promise of snow, a stark contrast to the humid, bustling air of Muzurifu he had left behind. He pulled the collar of his thick, borrowed winter coat tighter around his neck, his breath pluming in a white cloud before him. Hokkaido in late autumn was a world away from everything he knew. The landscape was a vast, rugged tapestry of deep green forests, stark gray mountains capped with the first dustings of white, and a sky so wide and blue it felt like it could swallow him whole. It was beautiful, but it was an intimidating, indifferent kind of beauty. It felt ancient and wild, a place that didn't care for heroes or villains, a place that simply was. The official story, the one fed to his mother and his concerned classmates, was specialized quirk counseling. Aizawa had delivered the news with his usual deadpan expression, explaining that after the incident at the training camp, UA's top counselors had recommended an intensive, one-on-one retreat for Midoriya to better synchronize with the unique mental and emotional aspects of his powerful quirk. It was a plausible lie, vague enough to be believable and important-sounding enough to quell most questions. His mother had cried, of course, worried but ultimately trusting of the prestigious Hero Academy. His friends in Class 1A had been supportive, if a little envious. Uraraka had given him a thumbs up, her expression a mixture of worry and encouragement. Ida had delivered a formal, chopping speech about the importance of mental fortitude. Even Bakugo had just grunted something that sounded vaguely like "don't come back weaker, nerd," which was the closest thing to a well-wish Izuku had ever received from him. But Izuku knew the truth. This wasn't counseling. This was an exorcism. He was being taken to the middle of nowhere to confront the demon that lived inside him. Toshinori Yagi, looking even more frail and out of place than usual in a comically oversized parka, stood beside him, scanning the horizon. "He should be here," he muttered, his voice thin in the cold air. A beat-up, rust-colored pickup truck that looked like it had survived several minor wars rumbled into the small airfield's parking lot. The man who stepped out was not what Izuku had been expecting. He was short, maybe 160 centimeters at most, but built like a fire hydrant. He wore a flannel shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed work boots, seemingly oblivious to the biting cold. His face was a roadmap of harsh living, framed by wild, dark hair that peeked into two distinct points and a set of magnificent, bushy mutton chops sideburns. His eyes, deep-set and intelligent, missed nothing. He had a cigarillo clamped between his teeth, unlit. "Yagi," the man grunted. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones grinding together. "Logan," Toshinori replied, a respectful nod. "It has been a long time." "Not long enough," Logan retorted, his eyes flicking from Toshinori to Izuku. He gave the boy a quick, dismissive once-over, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second, and a faint, almost imperceptible twitch of his nose was the only sign that he was assessing him. "This is the kid?" "This is Izuku Midoriya," All Might said, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "My boy, this is an old acquaintance who has agreed to help you." Izuku, remembering his manners despite the gnawing anxiety in his stomach, bowed deeply. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." "Thank you so much for taking the time to cut the crap," Logan snapped, the words sharp enough to make Izuku flinch and stand bolt upright. "I ain't a sir and this ain't an honor. Get in the truck. It's cold." He turned and lumbered back to the driver's side without a second glance. Izuku looked at All Might, his eyes wide with uncertainty. All Might gave him a weak, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "He has a unique way of communicating. Just be patient." The ride was a tense, rattling journey that took them further and further from civilization. The paved roads gave way to gravel, which then devolved into a bumpy dirt track that seemed more suggestion than path. The truck's suspension groaned in protest with every rut and rock. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were the roar of the engine and the squeaking of the chassis. Logan drove with a focused, grim silence, his eyes on the road. Izuku sat wedged in the middle, acutely aware of the sheer density of the man next to him. Logan radiated a kind of compressed energy, a tightly coiled stillness that was far more intimidating than muscular's explosive bulk. He also smelled faintly of pine needles, motor oil, and something else, something wild and metallic, like old blood. Finally, the truck broke through a thick stand of fir trees and into a clearing. Nestled by the shore of a vast, steel-gray lake was a small, rustic cabin. It was built of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney puffing a lazy trail of white smoke into the sky. It looked solid, peaceful, and utterly isolated. It was the kind of place you went to disappear. Logan killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the sighing of the wind through the pines. "All right, we're here," he announced, pulling the keys from the ignition. He turned in his seat, fixing Izuku with a hard, unblinking stare. "I'm retired, Yagi. I told your rat-faced boss that. I don't train kids. I don't run a school. And I sure as hell don't do counseling. So before we waste any more of my time, you're gonna tell me again why I shouldn't just throw you both back in this rust bucket and send you packing." Tashinori's face was grim. "Logan," I explained on the phone. "The boy has inherited my quirk, one for all. It's a power that stockpiles over generations, but it's more than that. It's an amplifier for the user's spirit. And it's unlocked something in him. A rage. A berserker state he can't control." Logan grunted, unimpressed. "Kid gets mad in a fight. So what? Happens to the best of us. It's more than that," Tashinori insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "He nearly beat a villain to death after the man was already unconscious. He didn't even know he was doing it. He became something else. Something feral. The doctor said if he'd kept it up for another minute, the power would have destroyed his body from the inside out." Logan's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at Izuku, really looked at him this time. He saw the permanent, haunted fear in the boy's eyes. He saw the way his hands, now free of their braces but wrapped in thick compression bandages, trembled slightly. He saw a kid who was more terrified of himself than of any villain. "Let me see your arms," Logan commanded. Hesitantly, Izuku peeled back the sleeves of his coat and sweatshirt. He slowly unwrapped the bandage on his right forearm. The skin was a horrifying tapestry of angry, raised scar tissue. Jagged, purple-red lines crisscrossed from his wrist to his elbow, a chaotic map of his body's panicked, clumsy attempts to heal itself from an injury it couldn't comprehend. It looked like his arm had been struck by lightning, from the inside. Logan leaned in, his gaze intense. He didn't say anything. He just looked. Then, Izuku felt a surge of frustration, a desperate need to make this man understand. He was his last hope. "He doesn't believe me," Izuku thought, his anxiety boiling over into a flash of anger. "He thinks I'm just some weak kid who can't handle his power." Driven by that desperation, he did something stupid. He focused, drawing on the familiar warmth of One for All. It wasn't a conscious decision to attack, just a desire to show him. A faint green energy began to crackle around his arm, the sparks dancing over the ruined landscape of his skin. The effect on Logan was instantaneous and dramatic. His head snapped up, his eyes widening for the first time. His nostrils flared. He wasn't just seeing the power. Izuku realized with a jolt that the man was smelling it. He could smell the ozone of the raw energy, the metallic tang of a quirk that was intertwined with blood and genetics. But he seemed to be smelling something else, too. Something that only he could recognize. Logan leaned back, the cigarillo falling from his lips onto the dusty floor of the truck. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes boring into Izuku's, but his gaze seemed to be looking through him, into him. He was looking at the rage. The cold, sleeping beast that Izuku had tried so hard to deny. And he recognized it. It was a scent he knew intimately. The scent of an untamed animal that had, by some miracle, found its way into the body of a terrified teenage boy. "Ha!" Logan finally grunted. It was a soft, thoughtful sound. He then turned his gaze to Tashinori. "All right, Yagi? You can go now." Tashinori blinked. "What? But I thought I would stay to supervise." "Supervise what?" Logan cut him off. "You want to stand around and hold his hand? You already told me you don't know jack about this. Your being here ain't gonna help. It'll just give him a crutch to lean on, a safety net. My training ain't got safety nets." He learns my way, or he leaves broken. The world doesn't need another out-of-control weapon running around with a hero license. You want him fixed? Leave him with me. End of story. The finality in his tone was absolute. All Might, the former symbol of peace, looked from the implacable mountain of a man to his wide-eyed, terrified successor. He had brought the boy here for this. He had to trust the process. He had to trust this ghost from the past. He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. Be strong, my boy. Listen to him. Learn from him. I will be back when he says you are ready. And with that, Toshinori Yagi got out of the truck, his tall, skeletal frame looking strangely diminished against the vastness of the wilderness. He gave Izuku one last, long, hopeful look, then turned and began the long walk back toward the airfield. Izuku watched him go until his figure was just a small dot on the horizon. A profound sense of isolation washed over him. He was alone, truly alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a man who looked at him like he was a faulty piece of equipment. Logan waited until All Might was completely out of sight before he spoke again. He got out of the truck and gestured for Izuku to follow. Get your bag. Put it in the cabin. Then meet me by the lake. Izuku did as he was told, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. The cabin's interior was Spartan but clean. A single room, dominated by a stone fireplace. There was a simple bed in one corner, a small kitchenette in another, and a table with 2 chairs. It smelled of wood smoke and old leather. There was a bookshelf overflowing with worn paperbacks, classic literature, history books, philosophy. It was a strange contradiction to the brutish exterior of the man who lived here. He dropped his duffel bag by the bed and hurried back outside, pulling his coat tight. Logan was standing on a small, rocky pier that jutted out into the lake. The water was dark and impossibly clear, the surface like black glass. All right, kid, Logan said, not turning to look at him. Let's see what we're working with. Your old man said you got a berserker problem. So, let's see the berserker. Izuku stared at him, confused. What? I can't just turn it on. It only happened when Muscular was going to kill Kota. So you need a reason, Logan said, finally turning. His eyes were hard. Fine. I'll give you a reason. He moved. It was impossibly fast, a blur of motion that defied his stocky frame. He closed the distance between them on the pier in a single step and his hand lashed out, not in a punch, but in an open-palmed slap that cracked across Izuku's cheek with the sound of a whip. The sting was shocking, but the humiliation was worse. Izuku stumbled back, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes wide with disbelief. What was that for? He stammered. For being a whiny brat, Logan growled, advancing on him. You come all the way out here, wasting my time, and you expect me to what? Read you a textbook? Your problem is you can't control your anger, so get angry. He shoved Izuku hard in the chest. The boy stumbled back again, catching himself at the very edge of the pier. Your precious All Might is gone, Logan taunted, his voice a low, vicious rasp. Your mommy ain't here to cry over you. Your little hero friends can't help you. It's just you and me, kid, and right now, I'm thinking bringing you here was a big mistake. He was prodding, deliberately pushing every button he could find. He was trying to make Izuku angry. And it was working. A hot flush of indignation and fury rose in Izuku's chest. This man didn't know him. He didn't know what he'd been through. You don't know anything about me. Izuku shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. I know you're a scared little kid who got handed a nuke and is crying 'cause it's heavy, Logan shot back. He lunged forward, but this time it wasn't a slap or a shove. It was a test. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. The green lightning of One for All flared to life, not the horrifying aura from the forest, but the familiar crackle he trained so hard to master. He ducked under Logan's lunge, channeling 5% into his legs to create distance. Finally, Logan grunted, a flicker of something that might have been approval in his eyes. Now, here's your first and only test for today. Try and land one clean hit on me. Just one. You do that, and I'll consider teaching you. Izuku's jaw tightened. This was it. A simple, brutal test. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He settled into the full cowl stance Aizawa and Gran Torino had taught him. The 5% power flowed through him, a familiar and comforting hum. He was faster than most, stronger than most. This old man, he was tough, but he was just a man. Izuku dashed forward, aiming a straight right at Logan's chest. It was like punching at a ghost. Logan didn't seem to move much at all. A simple, almost lazy turn of his shoulders, and Izuku's fist slid past him, hitting nothing but cold air. The boy's momentum carried him forward, and before he could even register what was happening, a hard foot swept his legs out from under him. He hit the wooden pier hard, the impact jarring his teeth. He scrambled back up, his face flushed with embarrassment. Too slow, Logan grunted. Izuku tried again. This time he used his speed, feinting left before darting right, aiming a kick at Logan's side. Logan didn't even bother to dodge. He simply raised his arm and blocked the kick with his forearm. It was like kicking a steel girder. A jolt of pain shot up Izuku's leg, and he recoiled with a gasp. Too weak, Logan said, his expression unchanged. Izuku growled in frustration. He pushed his output to 8%, the highest he could go without shattering his own bones. The green energy around him intensified. He became a blur of motion, launching a flurry of kicks and punches, using his shoot style to its fullest. He was faster, more agile, a whirlwind of controlled power. It made no difference. Logan stood his ground, a rock in the center of a storm. His movements were minimal, brutally efficient. A slight turn here, a tilted shoulder there. A raised hand to parry, a quick step to pivot. He wasn't just dodging. He was redirecting Izuku's momentum, using the boy's own force against him. Izuku felt like he was fighting water, an opponent with no solid surface to hit, who yielded at every turn only to be exactly where he wasn't supposed to be. For all his speed and power, he couldn't land a single, solid blow. After a full minute of this frantic, fruitless assault, Izuku was panting, his lungs burning from the cold air. He was frustrated, exhausted, and humiliated. In a final, desperate gambit, he put all his momentum into a single, powerful axe kick, aiming to bring his heel down on Logan's shoulder. This time, Logan didn't dodge. He moved in. As Izuku's leg came down, Logan stepped inside the arc of the kick, his body moving with a speed that belied his age and build. One hand shot out and clamped around Izuku's ankle, halting the kick in midair. The other hand grabbed the front of Izuku's shirt. With a single, explosive grunt of effort, Logan lifted the boy off his feet and, with a powerful twist of his body, spun and threw him. Izuku sailed through the air in a surprised arc, his mind failing to process the sudden reversal. He landed with a massive, shocking splash in the icy water of the lake. The cold was absolute. It was a physical shock that stole his breath and seized every muscle in his body. It was so cold it felt hot, a burning, paralyzing sensation that instantly overwhelmed his senses. He flailed, his waterlogged coat and boots pulling him down. The shock made him gasp, and he inhaled a mouthful of frigid lake water, choking and sputtering. Panic set in. He was sinking. His limbs felt like lead. The world was a blur of dark water and fading light. Suddenly, a powerful hand grabbed him by the collar of his coat and hauled him out of the water like a hooked fish. He was unceremoniously dumped back on the pier, shivering, gasping, and coughing up water. He lay there, a pathetic, sodden heap, looking up at the man standing over him. Logan was breathing normally, not even a sheen of sweat on his brow. Izuku had failed. He had used his power, his technique, his speed, and he had been effortlessly, contemptuously defeated. The last ember of his hope began to die. Logan looked down at him, his face impassive. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a Zippo lighter, and finally lit the cigarillo that had been sitting on his truck's floor. He took a long drag, the tip glowing red in the dimming afternoon light. "All right," Logan said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "You can stay." Izuku stared up at him, bewildered, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. But I lost." "I didn't even touch you." "Yeah, you lost," Logan agreed, taking another puff. "You were sloppy, predictable, and you let your frustration get the better of you. But you didn't quit, and when I pushed you, you didn't whine, you fought back. That's something to work with." He knelt, bringing his face level with Izuku's. The smell of cigar smoke and winter air filled Izuku's senses. Logan's eyes were deadly serious. But you gotta understand something, kid. This ain't UA. There are no grades. There are no safety nets. He learns my way, or he leaves broken. The world doesn't need another out-of-control weapon. He repeated the words he had said to All Might, but this time they were directed at Izuku, a promise and a threat. So here's the deal. You do everything I say, no questions asked. You complain, you go home. You give up, you go home. You lie to me about what's going on in that head of yours, and I'll throw you back in that lake myself. Understood? Izuku, shivering uncontrollably but with a new, tiny spark of hope igniting in his chest, looked into those ancient, hard eyes. He saw no pity, no sympathy. But he saw a purpose. A brutal, unforgiving purpose, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was exactly what he needed. He managed a single, firm nod. Good, Logan grunted, standing up. Now get inside and get out of those wet clothes before you freeze to death. Your real training starts at sunrise. He turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving Izuku alone on the pier, dripping and freezing, but for the first time since the forest, not entirely hopeless. The path ahead was going to be harder than anything he had ever imagined. It was going to be a path of pain, endurance, and brutal honesty. It was the path of the Wolverine. And it had just begun. Sunrise in Hokkaido was a merciless affair. It didn't gently coax the world awake. It sliced through the darkness with a blade of frigid, pale light, painting the undersides of the clouds in stark shades of pink and orange. For Izuku Midoriya, it had become the sound of his alarm clock, the sharp, insistent rap of Logan's knuckles on the cabin door. Up, kid! Sun's wasting time and so are you. There was no negotiation. There was no 5 more minutes. The first day, Izuku had made the mistake of groaning and trying to burrow deeper into his warm sleeping bag. The door had been kicked open with enough force to rattle the entire cabin, and a bucket of ice-cold lake water had introduced him to the reality of his new schedule. He hadn't made that mistake again. The training began before breakfast, before the sun had even fully cleared the jagged peaks of the mountains across the lake. It wasn't about quirks or combat techniques. It was about breaking him down to his most fundamental components. It was about endurance. The first week was a blur of grueling, monotonous labor. Their mornings began with a run. It wasn't a jog on a manicured track. It was a brutal, cross-country scramble through the dense, unforgiving forest. Logan would set a relentless pace, his short, powerful legs churning through tangled undergrowth, over fallen logs, and up steep, rocky inclines without ever seeming to tire. Izuku, with his 8% full cowl, could keep up, but it was a constant, draining effort. Faster, kid, Logan would grunt, not even breathing heavily. A real fight doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. They would run for an hour, sometimes 2, until Izuku's lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass and his legs were screaming in protest. Then they would return to the cabin, not for rest, but for the day's primary chore, chopping wood. The woodpile was a monstrous, ever-growing entity. Logan had felled several massive pine trees, and it was Izuku's job to buck the logs into rounds and then split them. The axe was heavy and unwieldy in his hands, which were still tender and healing. The first few days were a clumsy, frustrating disaster. His swings were awkward, often glancing off the wood with a dull thud. His hands, accustomed to notebooks and pencils, quickly blistered then bled. He tried to use one for all to add power to his swings, but Logan shut that down immediately. No, he'd said, stopping the axe mid-swing with one hand. You use that fancy light show of yours and you'll turn this axe head into shrapnel. This ain't about power. This is about work. Feel the weight of it. Find the grain. Let the tool do the job. Your power makes you lazy, so he chopped. Hour after hour. The blisters on his hands broke, bled, and eventually hardened into thick, rough calluses. He learned the rhythm of it, the lift, the aim, the satisfying thwack as the steel bit into the wood, the clean crack as a log split perfectly in two. His shoulders and back ached with a deep, profound soreness he had never known. It was a pain born not of acute injury, but of pure, relentless physical exertion. In the afternoons, the training took a different, colder turn. Logan would lead him to the edge of the lake, where a small stream fed into it, creating a shallow, fast-moving channel of water. Logan commanded on the first day. Izuku had stared at him, then at the water, which was so cold it seemed to steam in the crisp air. In the water? You got hearing problems? Get in. Sit. Stripping down to his shorts, the cold air hitting his skin like 1,000 tiny needles, Izuku waded into the stream. The shock was breathtaking. It was a physical assault, a cold so profound it felt like it was leaching the very heat from his bones. He sat down as instructed, the rushing water pushing against him, his teeth chattering so hard he thought they would crack. Now meditate, Logan said from the bank, lighting a cigarillo. And meditate? Izuku stammered, his body convulsing with shivers. I see, can't even think. That's the point, Logan grunted. Your body is screaming at you. It's telling you you're in danger, that you're gonna freeze. It's a liar. The pain is real, but the danger ain't. Your mind is weak, it listens to the body's panic. I want you to sit in that noise, in that pain, and find the quiet spot in the middle of it. I want you to tell your body to shut the hell up. You're the one in charge, not it. Stay there till I say you can get out. The first session was a 30-minute eternity of pure misery. Izuku couldn't think of anything but the cold. It was a roaring, all-consuming monster. But as the days went on, something began to change. He learned to accept the initial shock, to breathe through it. He began to find that quiet spot Logan had talked about. It was a tiny, flickering point of focus in the howling blizzard of his physical sensations. He learned to observe the pain, to acknowledge it, without letting it control his entire being. He was still cold, still miserable, but he was no longer a victim of the sensation. He was enduring it. After 10 days of this grueling routine, Izuku felt different. He was leaner, harder. The soft edges of his student life were being chipped away, revealing something tougher underneath. The calluses on his hands were like armor. The constant, deep-seated ache in his muscles had become a familiar hum, a reminder of the work he was putting in. He still felt fear, but it was overshadowed by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He thought this was the training. He was wrong. This was just the preface. One morning, after their run, Logan didn't point him toward the woodpile. Instead, he gestured toward the center of the clearing. All right, kid. Time for your first real lesson. We're gonna spar. A flicker of nervous energy shot through Izuku. He had sparred before, with his classmates, with Gran Torino, with All Might. He knew the protocols, the rules of engagement. Okay, Izuku said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. What are the rules? Is it just hand-to-hand? Can I use my quirk? Logan gave a short, humorless laugh. Rules? There's one rule, try not to die. And yeah, use your quirk. Use anything you got. It won't be enough. Izuku took his stance, the familiar green energy of full cowl at 8% enveloping him. He was faster now, stronger. His stamina was vastly improved. He felt ready. Logan didn't even bother to take a stance. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, looking almost bored. Come on, then. Show me what that hero school taught you. Izuku took a deep breath and moved. He was a green blur, circling Logan, looking for an opening. He feinted high with a kick, then dropped low, sweeping a leg at Logan's ankles. It was a move he'd used effectively in training with Aizawa. Logan didn't even flinch. He simply lifted his foot a few inches off the ground, letting Izuku's leg sweep through the empty air beneath it. As Izuku was off balance, a hard, sharp kick from Logan connected with his supporting thigh. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was perfectly placed. A jolt of paralyzing pain shot through Izuku's leg, and he stumbled, his full cowl flickering. Sloppy, Logan grunted. You telegraphed that from a mile away. Frustration flared in Izuku's chest. This was just like the pier. He grit his teeth and came at Logan again, this time with a direct, frontal assault, a flurry of punches and kicks aimed at overwhelming his opponent. What followed was a masterclass in brutal efficiency. Logan moved with a grace that was utterly at odds with his stocky frame. He parried Izuku's punches not with his arms, but with his elbows and shoulders, hard points of impact that sent jolts of pain back up Izuku's own limbs. He sidestepped kicks, letting Izuku overextend, then punished him with a quick jab to the ribs or a chop to the back of the neck. It was utterly demoralizing. Izuku felt like a child fighting an adult. For every one of his attacks, Logan had a simple, painful counter. The man wasn't even trying to win. He was dissecting Izuku's fighting style, piece by piece, and showing him how useless it was. The insults were as constant and sharp as the blows. You call that a punch? My grandmother hits harder, and she's been dead for 60 years. Thwack. A sharp rap to the back of his head. You move your feet like you're walking in mud. Are you a hero or a dancer? Whap. A stinging slap to his calf. You protect your head, you leave your body open. You protect your body, you leave your head open. You're a walk-in invitation for a beatdown. Smack. A hard chop to his solar plexus that drove the wind from his lungs. Izuku gasped for air, stumbling back. The pain was adding up. His ribs ached, his head was ringing, and his muscles were beginning to seize up. But worse than the pain was the humiliation. The hot, familiar feeling of impotent anger began to boil in his gut. It was the same anger he'd felt facing Bakugo in their first combat trial, the same frustration he'd felt against Todoroki. It was the feeling of being utterly, hopelessly outclassed. Is that all you got, kid? Logan taunted, his voice a low growl. All that power, and you fight like a scared rabbit. What's the matter? Afraid you're gonna break? Something inside Izuku snapped. The calm, controlled 8% of full call vanished, replaced by a surge of raw, untamed power. The green aura around him intensified, crackling with a new, dangerous energy. He didn't think. He just reacted. He let the anger take the wheel. Detroit smash! He roared, channeling a sudden, massive burst of one for all into his right fist. It wasn't 100%, but it was far more than his body was ready for. Maybe 20 or 30%. He lunged forward, his arm a green missile aimed directly at Logan's chest. Logan's eyes widened, not with fear, but with a kind of clinical interest. There it is, he murmured, but he didn't try to block it. He didn't try to meet force with force. At the last possible second, as Izuku's fist was inches from his chest, he moved. He sidestepped, not away from the punch, but into it, flowing around the attack like water around a rock. Izuku's fist, carrying enough force to shatter concrete, blasted past him, creating a shockwave that tore up the ground and flattened the nearby bushes. The boy's body was pulled forward by the massive, uncontrolled momentum, and in that moment of vulnerability, Logan struck. His movements were a blur. His left hand shot out and grabbed Izuku's outstretched, overcharged arm at the wrist. His right hand, its fingers stiffened into a knife hand, jabbed with surgical precision into the side of Izuku's neck, striking the brachial plexus nerve cluster. The world dissolved into pure, white-hot agony. It wasn't like a punch or a kick. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated neurological fire. A signal of absolute, catastrophic pain shot down Izuku's arm, making the memory of his previously broken bones feel like a pleasant daydream. His entire right side went numb, then erupted in a firestorm of sensation. The green energy of one for all sputtered and died. The arm, which a second ago had been a weapon of mass destruction, went completely limp, dangling uselessly at his side. Izuku screamed. It was a raw, strangled sound, torn from his throat. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground, clutching his paralyzed arm, his body convulsing. He lay there on the cold, hard-packed earth, gasping, tears of sheer, unadulterated pain streaming down his face. He had never felt anything like it. It was a pain that bypassed muscle and bone and went straight for the nervous system. It was a pain designed to incapacitate, to shock the system into submission. Logan stood over him, his shadow falling across Izuku's writhing form. His expression was grim, devoid of any satisfaction. You let the anger blind you, he growled, his voice low and serious. The second you got frustrated, you threw your training out the window. You threw your technique out the window. You went for the big, stupid, haymaker, and you left yourself wide open. He nudged Izuku's shoulder with the toe of his boot. Get up. Izuku couldn't. He could only lie there, his mind a roaring inferno of pain, his right arm feeling like a dead weight that was simultaneously on fire. I can't, he sobbed. My arm. I know all about your arm, Logan said, his voice unyielding. I hit you with a nerve strike. It'll wear off in a few minutes. Now, I said, get up. Using his one good arm, Izuku tried to push himself up. He was shaking, dizzy, disoriented. The pain was a thick fog in his mind, making it impossible to think clearly. This is the lesson, kid, Logan said, his voice cutting through the haze of agony. Pay attention, 'cause it's the most important one I'm ever gonna teach you. He crouched down, forcing Izuku to look him in the eye. Logan's gaze was intense, ancient, and held not a shred of pity. Pain is a teacher. It's the best damn teacher you'll ever have. It's honest. It never lies. That feeling in your arm right now? That's your body screaming at you, telling you that you made a mistake. It's telling you where you're weak. It's telling you that you left yourself open for an attack that could have gotten you killed. He poked a hard finger into Izuku's chest. Most people, they run from pain. They try to numb it, ignore it, pretend it ain't there. A hero can't afford that luxury. A real fight, a dirty fight, you're gonna get hurt. You're gonna get stabbed, shot, broken. Your fancy quirk ain't gonna make you invincible. The fight doesn't stop just 'cause you're in pain. That's when it starts. The intensity in Logan's voice was magnetic. Despite the agony, Izuku found himself listening, clinging to the words. You need to learn to think through the pain, Logan continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. You need to learn to function inside it, to let it be a part of you, without letting it become all of you. It's a signal, kid. Nothing more. It tells you you're still alive. It tells you the fight ain't over. You accept it. You use it. You let it make you angry, sure, but you don't let it make you stupid. You let it focus you. You let that fire burn away all the bullcrap, all the fear, and leave only what you need to do to survive. Slowly, sensation began to return to Izuku's arm, first as a tingling pins and needles feeling, then as a deep, throbbing ache. He could move his fingers again. The overwhelming agony was receding, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a new, startling clarity. He looked at Logan, really looked at him. He saw the network of old scars on his face and arms, the deep lines etched by decades of hardship. This man wasn't just speaking from theory, he was speaking the gospel of his own life, a life written in a language of pain and survival. Get up, Logan said again, his voice softer this time. He stood and offered a hand. Izuku took it. Logan hauled him to his feet with surprising ease. He was unsteady, but he was standing. The berserker rage you're so scared of, it's fueled by the same fire as your frustration, Logan explained, turning and walking back towards the cabin. It's a shortcut. You feel overwhelmed, you get angry, and you let the monster off the leash, hoping it'll solve the problem for you. But the monster doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about the people you're trying to save. It just cares about destruction. He stopped at the cabin door and looked back at Izuku. From now on, our spars ain't gonna be about you trying to hit me. They're gonna be about you getting hit. Over and over. I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna push you. I'm gonna make you angry. And your job ain't to beat me. Your job is to stay standing. To stay focused. To think, even when every part of you is screaming to just let go and rage. You're gonna learn to live in the pain. You're gonna make it your home. Izuku stood alone in the clearing, his body a symphony of aches and bruises, his right arm throbbing with a phantom agony. He felt broken. He felt weak. But for the first time, he felt like he was beginning to understand. He had always seen his rage as a failure, a monster to be locked away. He had always seen pain as something to be endured until it was over. Logan was teaching him something different, something terrifying and profound. They weren't weaknesses to be overcome. They were tools. They were teachers. The training was no longer about getting stronger. It was about getting tougher, in a way he had never imagined. It was about forging his mind into a weapon as powerful as his quirk, a mind that could withstand any amount of pain, any amount of rage, and never lose sight of the hero it was meant to be. The sun was higher in the sky now, but for Izuku, the day was just beginning. And it was going to hurt. The physical abuse, for Izuku could think of no other word for it, continued relentlessly. Every day they sparred. And every day, Izuku lost. Logan was a brutally effective teacher, his methods as refined and merciless as a surgeon's scalpel. He never inflicted lasting damage, never broke a bone or caused an injury that wouldn't heal by the next morning, but he was a master of inflicting pain. He used pressure points, nerve strikes, and joint locks. He landed stinging, open-handed slaps that left Izuku's ears ringing, and hard, thudding kicks to his thighs and ribs that left deep, blooming bruises. The goal was never to knock him out, but to keep him in a state of constant, distracting agony. Izuku's job, as Logan had commanded, was to endure it. He had to stay on his feet, keep his guard up, and most importantly think, "Where's the next hit coming from, kid?" Logan would growl, circling him. "I just hit your left side. You're favoring it. You're leaving your right wide open. See it?" Smack. A hard chop to his right shoulder that sent a jolt down his arm. "You're letting the pain make your world small," he'd lecture, ducking under a desperate, clumsy swing from Izuku. "All you can think about is where you hurt. You gotta see the whole damn board, not just the square you're standing on." It was a nightmare. Izuku would end each session gasping on the ground, his body a canvas of fresh aches, his mind a buzzing hive of failure. Yet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something was changing. He was learning to function inside the pain. He learned to anticipate the blinding flash of a nerve strike and breathe through it, to accept the jarring impact of a blow to the ribs, and use that breath to recenter himself. The pain was still there, a constant, screaming companion, but it no longer owned him. It was just noise, and through that noise, he was learning to hear the quiet, clear voice of his own tactical mind. But after 3 weeks of this physical torment, Logan changed tactics. The physical crucible had forged a tougher vessel, but the volatile substance within remained. The rage was still there, a sleeping dragon in the deep caverns of Izuku's soul. It was time to wake it up. One afternoon, instead of leading him to the sparring ground, Logan gestured to the small, rocky beach by the edge of the lake. The wind was blowing hard, whipping the surface of the dark water into a frenzy of whitecaps. The sky was a heavy, oppressive gray. "Sit," Logan commanded, pointing to a flat, moss-covered rock a few feet from the water's edge. Izuku, wary and tense, did as he was told. He sat in a cross-legged position, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. He expected an order to meditate in the cold, another endurance test. Logan sat on a fallen log a few feet away, pulling a small, battered knife from his pocket. He began to methodically carve a piece of driftwood, shaving off long, thin curls of wood with practiced ease. The only sound was the scrape of the blade and the howl of the wind. "Close your eyes," Logan said after a long silence. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which was more unnerving than his usual growl. Izuku obeyed, the darkness behind his eyelids a welcome respite from the bleak landscape. "I want you to go back," Logan said. "Not to the fight with Muscular. Further back. I want you to find the first time you ever felt it." "Felt what?" Izuku asked, his voice small. "The anger," Logan clarified, his knife never ceasing its rhythmic scraping. "Not frustration. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Pure, hot, I want to break something anger. Find the seed. The very first one." Izuku's mind drifted. It was a strange request. He didn't think of himself as an angry person. He was a crybaby, a determined nerd, a hero fanboy. Anger wasn't part of his self-image, but Logan's question was a command, so he searched. He sifted through memories, a chaotic jumble of his 15 years. He saw flashes of the sludge villain, of the sports festival, of the USJ. There was fear, desperation, determination, but the specific flavor of anger Logan described was elusive. It was always buried under something else. I don't know," Izuku confessed. "I've been frustrated a lot. But angry, really angry." "Liar," Logan said, the word sharp but not accusatory. It was a statement of fact. "You're lying to me, and you're lying to yourself. That rage you got, the one that tore Muscular apart, that don't come from nowhere. That's a river that's been fed by 1,000 little streams for years. You just never let yourself look at it. So look now. Stop being a coward." The word coward stung. Izuku's fists clenched. He took a deep breath and dove deeper. He pushed past the heroic memories, past the UA entrance exam, passed his training with all might. He went back to the suffocating corridors of Aldera Junior High. He saw Bakugo. Not the rival he was begrudgingly coming to respect at UA, but the tormentor of his childhood. He saw the sneering face, the explosions popping in his palms, the casual cruelty. You're just a pebble on the side of the road. Why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life? He felt a familiar, sickening knot form in his stomach. It was the feeling of powerlessness, of humiliation. But Logan's voice echoed in his head, not sadness. Not disappointment. Anger. He focused on the knot. He peeled back the layers of fear and hurt, and underneath it all, he found it. A tiny, hot coal of pure, undiluted fury. It was the anger of being kicked when he was already down, the anger of being told he was worthless by the person he had once considered his closest friend. Bakugo, Izuku whispered, his eyes still closed. When he told me to jump. Good, Logan grunted. Stay there. What did it feel like? It felt unfair, Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly as he gave voice to the feeling for the first time. It was cruel. I'd never done anything to him. Not really. But he hated me. He hated me just for breathing. For trying. And I hated him for it. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to show him that I wasn't useless. I wanted him to hurt the way he hurt me. The confession felt like poison on his tongue. He had never, ever admitted that to anyone, not even himself. Heroes didn't think such things. Heroes didn't want to hurt people. And why didn't you? Logan asked, his voice relentless. Because he was stronger, Izuku said, the answer simple and shameful. He had his quirk. He was amazing. And I was, me. I was quirkless. Deku. Useless. If I tried to fight back, he would have just burned me. It would have been worse. So I just took it.